Welcome back to another episode of Hot Mess Espresso. This week we are going over the similarities and the differences between ADHD and BPD. And boy, did I find some things. So I guess to start off, just going to apologize for any kind of nasally or just all over kind of crappy I sound. I'm still fighting off whatever, like cold virus slate plague that either my husband or my family brought home. It's been less than fun. I tried to basically push this out until I felt better, or at least sounded better, but that wasn't the case. So you guys are just gonna deal with it as is. So when I first started the research for this episode, I didn't think I would be as surprised as I was. I have both ADHD and borderline / CPTSD. So I figured that there would be some things that were very ADHD and some things that were very BPD. And there are, but I did not realize how many things actually overlap. It is a little crazy to me, but because I'm at the risk of sounding like one of those cooking blogs, we're just gonna jump into it. So starting off with just in general, adult ADHD symptoms, they may include like impulsiveness, disorganization, and problems prioritizing, poor time management skills, problems focusing on a task, trouble multitasking, excessive activity or restlessness, poor planning, low frustration tolerance, frequent mood swings, problems following through and completing tasks, hot temper. I feel like that's the same as low frustration tolerance, but all right. And then trouble coping with stress. And then if we're going to go into the symptoms of BPD, just go ahead and check out the very first episode of season 1 of this podcast. It goes over all of that. And also in the middle of my research, I actually found that there are, because I'm still learning things about BPD and everything else, I'm not a professional. There's apparently 4 stages of BPD. So I will be looking more into that, and we'll be doing a future episode on this because that's very interesting to me. But the ADHD is striking. Focus. So with all of those, oh my God, my cat is losing his mind as per usual. So, with ADHD versus BPD, there is quite a bit that's just ADHD, quite a bit that's just BPD, and a lot that is together. So I went over the stuff for ADHD, just to very quickly gloss over the BPD, pervasive sense of emptiness, the impulsivity, which is kind of the same as ADHD, but with ADHD, it's regardless of stress. And with BPD, a lot of the impulsivity and like self-harm type of deals, those increase with stress. So that's how they're different. Marked by a pattern of instability in relationships, self-image, mood, intense relationships, pervasive fear of abandonment. We've gone over all of these. If you've listened to this podcast for 5 minutes, we've gone over a thing or two. But what is both is the impulsivity, with obviously the differences in where that impulsivity lies. Lord. Novelty seeking, interpersonal difficulties. Your self-esteem is often impacted with both. They both have emotional regulation difficulties. They both have an increased rate of eating disorders and substance abuse, which I found to be very interesting. I did not realize that. I knew that substance abuse and eating disorders were probably linked to BPD, but I hadn't really delved into that too much. I didn't realize that was also a thing with ADHD. So the more you know. So sensitivity to sensory changes, rejection sensitivity, mood, um, just being all over the place, a genetic overlap, and irritability. I so I kind of knew about the irritability. I did because everybody talks about, well, not everybody, but a lot of people talk about um the ADHD rage, and everybody knows the BPD. You got the BPD rages. So I just am a ragey little gremlin. But I did not know about the increased rates of eating disorders and substance abuse, both um the sensitivity to sensory changes 1,000% makes sense. Um, but also the genetic overlap was interesting to me. So as I kept looking, um, there are some studies that show that between 18 and 34% of adults with ADHD also have a diagnosis of BPD. And those that have both conditions tend to experience more severe symptoms and impairments than others with just one diagnosis. Lucky fucking me. And it definitely depends on the person what you're going to struggle with more. Person with both would struggle more with emotion regulation than somebody with just one. Um and then I kind of kept going, and obviously with all of this, because uh this is a very new topic. More research is definitely needed. Every study that I looked at, every little graphic, every little article, they all were saying the same thing, that more research is needed, not only for a better wide variety of percentages to get a little more accurate and less of a margin of error, but also how to better support individuals with both. And obviously, there still needs to be a ton of more research with um, supporting those with BPD and stuff like that. So I'm definitely glad that they put that in there. But there are also some more things that just kind of surprised me when I was looking at all of this. Um, an estimated 16 to 38% also have co-occurring ADHD. ADHD patients are 19.4 times more likely to be diagnosed with BPD. People with both report higher levels of distress, emotional reactivity, and impulsivity. Not necessarily surprising if you understand one and the other. And, if you put them in the same shit sandwich, it's going to be an absolute shit show. So another fact that was interesting is that there was a large population-based study. ADHDers have a 33.7% lifetime prevalence of BPD, which explains a lot. It can explain why getting better with at least my BPD can be really difficult at times because, according to the study, um, because I have the ADHD, it's almost like I have a permanent residency of emotional issues and all of that good stuff. But also, I didn't realize that ADHD is a risk factor for BPD. And when I thought about it, it kind of makes sense, because especially if ADHD already has a lot of the, rejection sensitivity and the emotional regulation difficulties and the impulsivity and things like that, that would make sense that it would be a risk factor for if you threw in if you threw in a bunch of trauma. It's like it is like a long-term cooking block and you get BPD at the end. I don't know why I made that. I just roll with it, guys. So I guess I'll kind of wrap this up with, because all the studies that I looked at, I definitely could have gone down a huge rabbit hole and could talk about this forever. But for the sake of time and my sanity, we're only doing like little snippets of this because I think that this is something that we can definitely expand the conversation on in a later episode, at a later date, on one of my live episodes, any of that. But the last little fun fact, on one of the studies, they found that 6 to 25% of adults with ADHD also have a cluster B personality disorder, which, to go over again, cluster B personality disorders are BPD, but it's also narcissistic personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, and histrionic personality disorder. So, in saying 6 to 25% of adults with ADHD also have one of those, in looking at just borderline patients, 35% of those also have ADHD. And while that sounds kind of daunting, from what I've talked about and what I looked at, it makes sense because so much overlaps. I mean, ADHD starts in childhood, borderline is definitely more of an adolescent thing. So you take, like I said earlier, you take your childhood ADHD, you slap some trauma on it, and voila, you have something that lands in the cluster B category, but a lot of the times it winds up being borderline. It's definitely something that I'm glad they're doing more research on, but also made me kind of feel a little bit better because I am a medical anomaly with a lot of things. So seeing 35%, I was just like, oh my God, it's not just me. Like, I don't have to be the only one that deals with this. And it sucks because there's a whole bunch of us that deal with, the double whammy of rage and emotion issues and rejection sensitivity and all of that not fun stuff. But it definitely made me feel less alone, less heavy, just less like not, I'm trying to find the word. It's not that it's less not good enough, but less just looked at negatively because, I just happen to have both and, there's not a ton of people. There's a ton of people. There's a lot of people. And I kind of love that in my own selfish, twisted little way because I'm so sick of dealing with things on my own. So, y'all are not alone if you have both. And actually, I'm very interested to see if anybody listening in either knows somebody that has both or has been diagnosed with both because I want to see how how many people that this reaches that they're like, "Hey, that's me too." So, that that wraps up this week. Hopefully feeling a lot better for next week. And until then, kids, stay hot and stay messy.